Ever wondered if society could work without marriage? Some ancient groups actually tried it. Picture this: communities sharing everything, even partners, all in the name of a perfect world. But what happened next? Get ready to dive into 7 ancient societies that dared to ditch marriage and the wild stories of their attempts to build a different kind of world. These are tales of radical ideas, bold experiments, and the stark realities they faced. Number 7. The Agathyrsi and their quest for universal brotherhood. Deep in the lands north of the Danube River, in what we might now call parts of Romania or Ukraine, lived a people known as the Agathyrsi. The famous Greek historian Herodotus, writing around 440 before Common Era, tells us about them. He describes them as a Scythian tribe, but with a luxurious side, fond of gold ornaments and living a life that seemed quite different from their neighbors. Their most striking custom, at least according to Herodotus, was their approach to relationships and family. Imagine a community where the concept of exclusive pairing of one husband and one wife simply did not apply in the way it did for many other cultures of the time. Herodotus wrote that the Agathyrsi have their women in common. This was not for reasons of simple indulgence, he suggested. Instead, it was a deliberate social strategy. Their aim was profound: that they may all be brothers and, as members of a single family, be free from all envy or hatred. Think about that for a moment. They believed that by sharing partners, all men in the community would effectively be fathers or brothers to all children. This, in their view, would eliminate jealousy between men and strife within families. If everyone was related, or potentially related, to everyone else, the bonds of kinship would extend across the entire tribe. It was an attempt to engineer social harmony by radically restructuring the very foundations of family. Herodotus does not give us extensive details on how this system worked day to day. Did women have a choice? How were children cared for if paternity was intentionally diffuse? These are questions that his brief account leaves unanswered. He presents it as a defining characteristic of their society, setting them apart from other Scythian tribes who, while having their own diverse customs, did not typically feature this particular arrangement as described for the Agathyrsi. Agathyrsi were also noted for other traits. They were said to be less warlike than other Scythians. Perhaps their internal social structure contributed to a more peaceful disposition, or perhaps their wealth made them less reliant on raiding. They engaged in trade, and their land was apparently rich in gold, which they used extensively. What became of the Agathyrsi and their unique social experiment? Herodotus is one of our primary sources for their existence as a distinct group with this custom. After his writings, they gradually fade from the historical record as a clearly identifiable people with this specific practice. Like many tribal societies of that era, they were likely absorbed by larger migrating groups, or their unique customs may have changed over time due to internal pressures or external influences. There is no record of a specific moment their society failed because of this practice, but rather the Agathyrsi, as a distinct entity with this reported custom, eventually ceased to be prominent in historical accounts. Their experiment in communal living and shared parentage, if Herodotus's account is accurate, did not become a lasting model that spread to other regions. Pressures of shifting populations, potential conflicts, and the rise of other powers in the region would have played a role in their eventual disappearance as the distinct group Herodotus described. The details of their decline are lost to time, leaving us with a fascinating but incomplete picture of a society that tried to build unity in a most unconventional way. Number 6. The Nasamones and a wedding night like no other. Travel with Herodotus again, this time to ancient Libya, a vast and often mysterious land to the Greeks of the 5th century before Common Era. Here, he introduces us to the Nasamones, a nomadic people who roamed the harsh desert landscapes. They were pastoralists, meaning their livelihood depended on their herds of animals. Like many nomadic groups, they had to be resilient and adaptable to survive in a challenging environment. The Nasamones had many customs that Herodotus found noteworthy, from their ways of divination using ancestral tombs to their burial practices. But one particular marriage custom stands out as a radical departure from the norms of exclusivity, at least for one specific night. And each man, after he has had intercourse, gives her a gift which he has brought with him from his home. Let us unpack this. The statement, "They hold them all in common," is somewhat ambiguous. It could imply a broader system of partner sharing beyond the wedding night, or it could be Herodotus' interpretation, colored by the striking nature of the wedding ritual. The more specific detail is about the wedding night itself. On this single night, the bride would have relations with all the male wedding guests. Each guest, in turn, would present her with a gift. What could be the purpose of such a practice? Herodotus does not offer a direct explanation from the Nasamones themselves, unlike his account of the Agathyrsi's motivations. Anthropologists, looking at similar, though not identical practices in other cultures, have suggested various possibilities for such customs, though these are speculative when applied to the Nasamones. Perhaps it was a way to create strong bonds between the new husband and his kinsmen or friends, symbolically sharing the bride to integrate her into the wider male community. Maybe it was believed to enhance fertility or bring good luck to the marriage. The gifts given to the bride could have represented a collective contribution to the new household, or a recognition of her role. It is important to note that this practice as described does not mean marriage itself was abolished. Men had many wives, indicating polygyny was practiced. The wedding night ritual, however, was a significant communal involvement in the act of marriage, temporarily suspending exclusivity at its very inception. It suggests a societal understanding where the community had a stake, or at least a symbolic participation, in the formation of new unions. The Nasamones were a significant people in their region for a time. They controlled important trade routes and were known for their independence. However, their story takes a turn. Herodotus mentions their conflicts with Greek colonists in Cyrenaica. Later historical sources indicate that the Nasamones continued to resist Roman expansion in North Africa. The Roman historian Cassius Dio records a major revolt by the Nasamones against Roman taxation and encroachment around 85 Common Era. While initially successful, this revolt was brutally crushed by Roman forces. The aftermath was devastating for the Nasamones. Many were killed and others were driven from their ancestral lands, further into the desert. Their power was broken. While it is impossible to directly link their wedding custom to their eventual subjugation, their society, with all its unique practices, suffered a severe blow. The Roman conquest and the subsequent pressures of Roman rule would have undoubtedly led to significant changes in their social structures and customs. The specific wedding night ritual, so startling to outside observers, likely did not survive these upheavals in its original form, if it was ever as widespread or uniform as Herodotus' account suggests. Their attempt at integrating the community so intimately into marriage, at least for that one night, became a footnote in the history of a people overwhelmed by larger imperial forces. Number 5. The Essenes and their purity-focused community. Now we journey to Judea, in the centuries just before and during the time of Jesus of Nazareth. Here, a fascinating Jewish sect known as the Essenes emerged, driven by a deep desire for ritual purity and a life lived strictly according to their interpretation of religious law. They are known to us through the writings of contemporary historians like Josephus, Philo of Alexandria, and Pliny the Elder, as well as through the incredible discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls starting in 1946. The Essenes established communities in various parts of Judea, but their most famous settlement was likely at Qumran near the Dead Sea. It is here that many of the scrolls were found. Their social structure was remarkable, and in many ways utopian in its aspirations. They sought to create a perfect holy society, set apart from what they saw as the corrupting influences of mainstream Jerusalem and its temple priesthood. One of the most distinctive features of some Essene groups was their approach to marriage and procreation. Josephus tells us that there was one order of Essenes that agrees with the other in their way of life and customs and rules, but differs from them in the point of marriage, as thinking that a continuance of the line of mankind is a thing not to be neglected. However, he also describes another, perhaps more prominent or well-known branch, that rejects pleasure as an evil, but esteems continence and the conquest over our passions to be virtue. This group did not marry. They did not condemn marriage for others, but for themselves, within their dedicated community, they chose celibacy. Why would they do this? Their focus was on extreme ritual purity. They believed that physical relations, even within marriage, could be a source of defilement, distracting from the intense spiritual devotion and communal life they prized. To maintain their state of holiness, many Essenes chose to forgo marriage and family life altogether. Pliny the Elder describes them as a solitary race, remarkable beyond all others in the whole world, who lived without any women, without the love of money, and only with palm trees for company. He notes with some amazement that their numbers were kept up by a constant stream of newcomers who were weary of life or driven to them by the fickleness of fortune. For those Essenes who did not marry, their community became their family. They shared all their property. New members would give all their possessions to the community upon joining. Everyone worked for the common good, and the fruits of their labor were distributed according to need. They ate communal meals in silence after purification rituals. They devoted themselves to study of their sacred texts, prayer, and meticulous observance of the Sabbath. This communal lifestyle, particularly for the celibate branches, represented a society that had, in effect, abolished marriage for its members. Children were not absent from all Essene consideration. Josephus mentions that some Essenes would adopt other people's children to educate them in their ways. But the core ideal for many was a life free from the bonds and potential impurities of marriage. What happened to these dedicated communities? The Essenes flourished for about 2 centuries, from roughly 150 before Common Era to around 70 Common Era. Their end was tied to the wider turmoil in Judea. The First Jewish-Roman War, which lasted from 66 to 73 Common Era, brought widespread destruction. The Roman legions, in their campaign to suppress the Jewish revolt, systematically destroyed towns and settlements across the land. Archaeological evidence from Qumran shows that the settlement was violently destroyed around 68 Common Era, likely by Roman soldiers. The inhabitants were killed or dispersed. The Dead Sea Scrolls themselves were hidden away in caves shortly before this destruction, presumably by Essenes hoping to preserve their sacred writings. With the destruction of their main centers and the devastation of Judea, the Essenes as an organized group largely disappeared from history. While their ideas may have influenced early Christianity and other Jewish mystical traditions, their specific communal experiment, including the branch that renounced marriage in pursuit of perfect holiness, came to an abrupt and violent end. Their utopian vision of a pure society, set apart and free from conventional family ties for many of its members, could not withstand the brutal realities of war and conquest. Number 4. The Carpocratians and the shocking rumors of shared wives. In the 2nd century Common Era, as early Christianity was still defining itself against a backdrop of diverse philosophical and religious ideas, a Gnostic teacher named Carpocrates emerged in Alexandria, Egypt. He and his followers, known as Carpocratians, developed a reputation for some truly radical beliefs and practices, particularly concerning social norms, property, and, most controversially, marriage and sexual freedom. Gnosticism itself was a broad movement with many variations, but generally Gnostics believed they possessed special secret knowledge, gnosis, about the true nature of God and the universe. Many Gnostics held a dualistic worldview, seeing the material world as flawed or evil created by a lesser deity, and the spiritual world as good and emanating from a true higher God. Salvation, for them, involved escaping the prison of the material body and world. Carpocrates, according to early church fathers like Irenaeus and Clement of Alexandria, who wrote extensively against Gnostic groups, took these ideas to an extreme. He is said to have taught that Jesus was a man born naturally to Joseph and Mary, but whose soul, being strong and pure, remembered what it had seen in the sphere of the unbegotten God. Because of this, Jesus was able to escape the powers that created the world. Carpocrates supposedly taught that anyone who could achieve a similar contempt for these worldly powers could perform similar feats, or even surpass the disciples of Jesus. This contempt for the world allegedly extended to worldly laws and moral codes. Carpocratians are accused of advocating a form of antinomianism, the belief that moral laws are not binding. According to their critics, they believed that to truly transcend the material world and its rulers, one had to experience everything, including acts conventionally deemed sinful. Only by paying one's dues through all forms of experience could the soul be freed from reincarnation and the cycle of worldly existence. Here is where the most scandalous accusations about marriage and relationships arise. Irenaeus, in his work Against Heresies, written around 180 Common Era, claimed that the Carpocratians practice magical arts and incantations, philters also, and love potions, and have recourse to familiar spirits and dream senders and to all other kinds of demoniacal influence. He further stated they lead a licentious life and maintain that things are evil or good simply in human opinion. He then makes the explosive claim: they have also a reputation for practicing the most abominable deeds, and they say that they have intercourse with whomsoever they please, and in whatsoever way they please. Clement of Alexandria, writing a bit later, around 200 Common Era, in his Stramata, provides even more specific, though equally hostile details. He mentions Carpocrates' son, Epiphanes, who supposedly died at the age of 17, but was revered as a god by the Carpocratians on the island of Same in Cephallenia. Epiphanes is credited with writing a work called On Righteousness, which Clement quotes as advocating the community of women. The argument, as Clement presents it from Epiphanes, was that God's righteousness is about equality and community. The sun shines equally on all. Food is available to all creatures. Therefore, divine law intended for women to be shared in common, just like other aspects of nature. Human laws imposing monogamous marriage were seen as a violation of this natural divine equality, leading to possessiveness and jealousy. Epiphanes allegedly argued, "He who says, 'You shall not covet,' speaks more ridiculously still when he adds, 'your neighbor's wife,' forcing into a private possession that which is common." So if these accounts are to be believed, the Carpocratians, or at least a faction inspired by Epiphanes, actively taught and perhaps practiced the system where marriage was abolished in favor of communal sharing of partners. This was framed not as mere hedonism, but as a philosophical and theological imperative, a way to live according to a higher divine righteousness and to hasten spiritual liberation. They allegedly held love feasts, where, after a meal, lamps were extinguished and people paired off freely. It is crucial to remember that our information about the Carpocratians comes almost entirely from their theological opponents, the early church fathers. These writers were engaged in fierce polemics to define Christian orthodoxy and suppress what they considered heresy. It was common in such polemics to accuse opponents of sexual immorality and outrageous practices to discredit them. Therefore, some scholars urge caution, suggesting these accounts might be exaggerated or even fabricated. However, the consistency of the accusations from different sources suggests there was likely something unusual about Carpocratian views on sexuality and community. Even if the details are distorted, their alleged practices, including the abolition of exclusive marriage in favor of community of women, were seen as a profound threat to the moral and social order by Orthodox Christians. What became of the Carpocratians? As a distinct Gnostic sect, they eventually faded from history. Condemnations by influential church fathers, coupled with the broader effort by the increasingly organized Christian church to standardize doctrine and suppress dissenting groups, meant that movements like Carpocratianism were modernized and ultimately disappeared. There was no single battle or conquest that ended them, but rather a gradual process of being out-competed, suppressed, and absorbed. Their radical attempt to redefine righteousness through the communal sharing of partners, if it truly occurred as described, was deemed too scandalous and dangerous to survive in the evolving religious landscape of the Roman Empire. Their story serves as a stark example of how societal norms, especially around marriage and family, can become central battlegrounds in ideological conflicts. Number 3. Catalhoyuk and a society without our kind of family. Let us travel way back in time, much further than any of the previous societies, to the Neolithic era, the New Stone Age. Around 9,500 to 7,700 years ago, in what is now modern-day Turkey, one of the world's earliest large settlements emerged, Catalhoyuk. This was not a city in the later Mesopotamian sense, but a vast proto-city or super-village, sprawling over many acres and housing perhaps several thousand people at its peak. Estimates range from 3,000 to 8,000 inhabitants. What makes Catalhoyuk so fascinating for our theme is not that they abolished marriage in the sense of getting rid of an existing institution, but rather that their society appears to have been structured in a way that the concept of the nuclear family unit, a married couple and their children living as an independent household, might not have been the primary cultures. The archaeological evidence from Catalhoyuk, meticulously gathered over decades of excavation, paints a picture of a very different social life. Imagine a town made entirely of mud brick houses, built so closely together that there were no streets or alleyways. People entered their homes through openings in the roof, climbing down ladders. Inside, these houses were remarkably similar in size and layout. Each had a main living area, often with platforms for sleeping or working, and smaller ancillary rooms for storage. What is striking is the lack of differentiation that would suggest rich and poor households, or ruler and rule. It appears to have been a remarkably egalitarian society, at least in terms of material wealth displayed in housing. Truly intriguing part related to family structure comes from how people lived and were buried within these houses. While burials were often found beneath the floors of the houses, detailed analysis of the human remains, including DNA studies, has not shown a clear pattern of genetically related individuals, like a father, mother, and their children, being consistently buried together in one house over generations. Instead, it seems that houses were occupied for long periods, perhaps by a core group, but the people buried there were not always close biological kin in a simple family sense. Children were often buried in different houses from adults, who might have been their biological parents. This has led some archaeologists, most notably Professor Ian Hodder, who led the excavations for many years, to suggest that the household at Catalhoyuk might not have been based on the biological nuclear family. Instead, daily life, food production, child-rearing, and ritual activities may have been organized around larger, possibly multi-generational communal groups that lived together in these interconnect houses. The house itself, rather than a bloodline, might have been the central social unit, with people moving between houses or groups over their lifetimes through various social arrangements we do not fully understand. There is little evidence of private, exclusive pairing in the way that marriage often implies exclusive rights and responsibilities. Art at Catalhoyuk is abundant, with wall paintings of hunting scenes, geometric patterns, and imposing figures of animals like bulls and leopards. Human figures are often depicted, but rarely in scenes that clearly represent a married couple or a nuclear family. There are famous female figurines, sometimes interpreted as mother goddesses or symbols of fertility, but their exact meaning and role in social structure remain debated. If this interpretation of a more communal house-based society is correct, then Catalhoyuk operated for nearly 2 millennia, with a system that did not prioritize or perhaps even recognize marriage in the way it was later defined. Child rearing could have been a more collective responsibility. The bonds that held society together might have been based more on shared residence, ritual participation, and communal labor rather than exclusive marital ties. Why did this way of life eventually end? Catalhoyuk was inhabited for about 1,800 years, a very long time. Around 5,700 before Common Era, the site was abandoned. There is no single clear reason for this abandonment. It could have been a combination of factors. Environmental changes, such as depletion of local resources like wood for building and fuel, or changes in the climate affecting agriculture, might have played a role. The river near the site shifted its course. There might have been internal social stresses as the population grew or as new ideas and social structures began to emerge. Perhaps the very egalitarian and communal system which worked for so long eventually faced challenges it could not overcome. It is not that their societal model failed in a dramatic collapse due to the lack of marriage. Rather, over a vast stretch of time, this way of living eventually gave way to other forms of social organization that emerged in the later Neolithic and Chalcolithic periods. As agriculture developed and societies became more complex elsewhere, different models of family, property ownership, and social hierarchy began to take root. Catalhoyuk represents an incredibly ancient and long-lasting experiment in human social organization, one that seems to have thrived for many centuries without relying on the institution of marriage as it is commonly understood. Its eventual fading was part of the slow, long-term evolution of human societies in the Near East. Number 2. Sparta and its state controllate approach to family life. Ancient Sparta, the legendary city-state in Laconia, Greece, is famous for its disciplined warriors, its austere lifestyle, and its powerful military. Behind the image of the hoplite soldier lies a fascinating and quite extreme social experiment that profoundly reshaped the meaning of marriage and family, subordinating them almost entirely to the needs of the state. This system flourished from around the 8th century before Common Era and defined Sparta until its eventual decline after the 4th century before Common Era. The Spartan system, known as the Agathyrsi, was designed to produce perfect soldiers and unwavering citizens. From the age of 7, Spartan boys were taken from their parental homes and raised in communal barracks. They endured harsh training, strict discipline, and were taught loyalty to Sparta above all else, even above their own families. This upbringing fundamentally altered the typical family dynamic. Marriage for Spartans was not primarily about love, companionship, or personal fulfillment in the modern sense. Its main purpose was procreation, to produce strong, healthy children who would grow up to serve the state. Spartan men typically married relatively late, around the age of 30, after they had completed their most intensive military training. Even after marriage, a Spartan man did not live with his wife. He continued to live in the barracks with his fellow soldiers, eating his meals in a communal mess hall until he reached a later age, sometimes as late as 60, though rules varied over time. The wedding itself was a peculiar affair. According to the historian Plutarch, writing centuries later, but drawing on earlier sources, the bride would have her hair cropped short, be dressed in men's clothes, and left alone in a dark room. The groom would sneak away from his barracks, visit his bride in secret, and then return to sleep with his comrades. These clandestine visits might continue for a considerable time, and it was said that some men had children before they had ever seen their wives in daylight. This secrecy emphasized that the man's primary loyalty was still to his military unit, not his new wife. Women in Sparta had more freedom and a higher status compared to women in other Greek city-states like Athens. They were expected to be physically fit to bear healthy children. They managed the households and estates, while the men were occupied with military duties. However, even their reproductive lives were subject to state interests. The concept of exclusive marital fidelity was also different. If a man was old or infertile, it was considered acceptable, even commendable, for him to allow a younger, more vigorous man to impregnate his wife to produce strong offspring for Sparta. Plutarch mentions that the Spartan lawgiver Lycurgus, the semi-mythical founder of their constitution, thought it absurd that men would carefully breed their dogs and horses for quality, but not apply similar principles to human reproduction. Therefore, an older man with a young wife might introduce to her a young man he admired for his physical and moral qualities, so she could bear a fine child. Conversely, a respectable man who admired another man's wife for her fine children might, with her husband's permission, have children with her. This was not seen as adultery in the conventional sense, but as a eugenic practice for the benefit of the community. Children were the priority, not the exclusivity, of the marital bond. This system effectively minimized the private family unit. The state, through the Agathyrsi and these unique marriage customs, became the dominant force in shaping citizens. Loyalty was to the collective, and personal relationships were secondary. The goal was to eliminate selfishness, luxury, and emotional attachments that might weaken a warrior's resolve or a citizen's dedication to Sparta. Did this system fail? Sparta was a dominant military power in Greece for centuries. Its warriors were feared and respected. In that sense, its social engineering was remarkably successful for a prolonged period. However, the very rigidity of the Spartan system may have contributed to its eventual decline. Population of true Spartan citizens, the Spartiates, dwindled over time. The harshness of the Agathyrsi, the constant warfare, and perhaps the unusual family arrangements made it difficult to maintain their numbers. There was also resistance to intermarrying with non-Spartiates, further shrinking the citizen pool. After its defeat by Thebes at the Battle of Leuctra in 371 before Common Era, Sparta's power began to wane significantly. Its social structures started to erode. Wealth became concentrated in the hands of fewer families, and the old egalitarian ethos among Spartiates weakened. Attempts were made in later centuries to revive the ancient Lycurgan reforms, but Sparta never regained its former dominance. The extreme subordination of marriage and family to state ideology, while creating a formidable military machine for a time, ultimately proved unsustainable in the long run as internal and external pressures mounted. The very system designed for strength contained elements that contributed to its eventual demographic and political decline. Number 1. The Mazdakites and their radical revolution of spared property and wives. Our final journey takes us to the Sasanian Empire of Persia, a vast and powerful state that was a rival to the Roman and later Byzantine empires. In the late 5th and early 6th centuries Common Era, a socio-religious movement arose that shook the foundations of this mighty empire. It was led by a Zoroastrian priest named Mazdak. This movement advocated for radical social reforms, including the communal sharing of property and, most controversially, the sharing of women, effectively aiming to abolish traditional marriage and family structures. Mazdak began preaching during the reign of Shah Kavad I, who ruled from 488 to 496 Common Era, and again from 498 to 531 Common Era. The Scythian Empire at this time was facing significant social and economic problems. There was great inequality, with a powerful aristocracy and priesthood controlling vast wealth and land, while the common people often suffered from poverty, famine, and heavy taxation. Mazdak's message found fertile ground among the dispossessed and those yearning for a more just society. Mazdak's teachings were a reinterpretation of Zoroastrianism, Persia's dominant religion. He preached a dualistic cosmology of light, good, and darkness, evil. But he emphasized pacificism, asceticism, and a return to a more egalitarian, communal way of life. He argued that God had originally provided the means of subsistence on earth for all humans to share equally. However, he claimed, greed, envy, wrath, and other negative forces, manifestations of darkness, had led individuals to unjustly appropriate property and women for themselves, causing strife and inequality. Therefore, Mazdak advocated for the abolition of private property and the communal sharing of resources, including land, goods, and even women. The idea of sharing women was particularly revolutionary and shocking to the established order. Mazdak reportedly argued that the desire for women and wealth were the primary causes of hatred and conflict among men. By making both communal, he believed these vices could be eliminated and humanity could return to a more harmonious, godlike state. This meant breaking up the traditional family units where women were considered the property of their husbands. Under Mazdak's proposed system, women would no longer be exclusively bound to one man. The historical sources, which are largely hostile to Mazdak, claim that his followers would enter the houses of the wealthy, take their possessions, and even their wives and daughters. Initially, Shah Kavad I actually supported Mazdak. Why would a king support such a radical movement? Kavad had his own reasons. He likely saw the Mazdakites as a useful tool to curb the power of the overweening nobility and the wealthy Zoroastrian clergy, who often challenged royal authority. With Mazdakite support, Kavad was able to implement some reforms, weaken his internal rivals, and perhaps even gain popularity among the lower classes. For a time, Mazdakism became a powerful force in Persia. Land was redistributed, granaries were opened to the poor, and the traditional social hierarchy was severely disrupted. However, the radicalism of the Mazdakites, particularly the sharing of women and the attack on noble privileges, provoked a fierce backlash from the aristocracy and the orthodox Zoroastrian priesthood. They viewed Mazdak's teachings as heretical and a direct threat to social order, morality, and their own power. The accounts from this period describe widespread social chaos, with noble families being plundered and their harems violated. Whether these accounts are entirely accurate or exaggerated by Mazdak's enemies is difficult to ascertain fully, but there is little doubt that his movement caused a massive upheaval. The alliance between Kavad and Mazdak did not last. Faced with overwhelming pressure from the nobility and clergy, and perhaps fearing that the movement was spiraling out of his control, Kavad eventually turned against the Mazdakites. The exact timeline is debated, but the suppression was brutal. Around the year 524 or 528 Common Era, Kavad, or more likely his son and heir Khosrow I, who would later be known as Khosrow Anushirvan, Khosrow of the Immortal Soul, orchestrated a great massacre of Mazdak and his followers. According to historical accounts, Mazdak and his leading supporters were invited to a banquet or a debate where they were then ambushed and killed. One story, possibly apocryphal, tells of Khosrow having the Mazdakites buried alive, head down, with only their feet showing, in a walled garden. He then supposedly invited Mazdak to view this garden of his human trees, before having him executed as well. With this bloody suppression, the Mazdakite movement was effectively crushed as an open political and social force. While some of its ideas may have lingered in underground sects or influenced later movements, its attempt to radically restructure Persian society by abolishing private property and traditional marriage came to a violent and definitive end. The established order based on hierarchy, private property, and patriarchal family structures reasserted itself with a vengeance. The Mazdakite experiment stands as one of history's most dramatic and ultimately tragic attempts to create a utopian society by dismantling the institution of marriage alongside other fundamental social pillars.